Okay, greetings and welcome to another Grenfell MediaWatch update. Today's edition I want to call the Office for Ministerial Crockashite. Now, last week we saw questions being asked about whether it was right to actually, trying to work out which one I'm going, whether it's right to actually have a TV drama made and screened about Grenfell before even a year has passed. Now, of course, one of the good things, it keeps the topic in public consciousness, and that's one of the tools that we need towards securing justice. But of course, the other side is it's just plain exploitative. Now, I'm not going to wade in on that debate other than to say that I do believe that at least a year should pass before anyone seeks to make a TV programme that's any kind of drama or representation based on Grenfell. But of course, money talks, and if it's a commercial project, I don't think they're going to give a damn. Talking about not giving a damn, last week we saw, and this is the sort of thing that we don't hear about, there's a complementary therapy group that operates or used to operate outside a space called The Curve, and essentially they've been booted out. They've been told that they can't practice their healing practices, and when I say complementary therapies, I'm talking about reflexology, acupuncture, body massages, you know, the alternative kind of healing sessions that go beyond talking therapies and just more and more drugs. So anyway, they've been told that Grenfell community is no longer in crisis, so, you know, we'll offer them a couple of your sessions and then that's it, that's your lot. Now, like I said, not a lot of people know about this, not a lot of people care about these kind of things, but these are the kind of issues that we kind of need to be more aware of, because slowly but surely everything seems to be reverting back to a abysmal normal. I say that because, do you remember the name Robert Black? Now, Robert Black, for those of you who don't know, he was the chief executive of the Kensington TMO. I remember a day, in fact the following morning after the fire took place, people were calling for his head. He was responsible for the maintenance, for the work and everything that was done on Grenfell, and he was nowhere to be seen. Well, what we now know is that just before New Year's Day, I think on the 31st of December, he resigned. And so, you know, you've got to think that 6 months after the massacre, he just vanishes into the sunset like a vampire turning into dust. And we have no idea what he's been doing between those times. Now, in Australia, they're pretty wise to this tactic of out of sight, out of mind. I mean, they have their own issues to do with cladding, and what they're trying to do is keep the topic alive. And actually, it's the firefighters that are doing this, not the government. Firefighters are the ones who are leading the campaign and saying we can't know what's happening in the UK happen over here in Australia. So how does that affect you and I here in the UK? Well, so we have a new Office for Product Safety and Standards. Well, I must admit, I'm one of those critics who thinks that this is really just a knee-jerk action in response to the lackluster response that occurred when we found out it was a hot point fridge freezer that caused the spark from inferno in the first place. Campaigners had long been asking for a unified response to recalling 40 products, and Hotpoint, Indeset, whatever they want to call themselves this week, had a history, a record of products that are actually combusting. We now have a new Office of Police Conduct, and yet its first job was to fail securing a prosecution for the officer who killed LaShawn Charles. So what is the point? These new offices that keep springing up every 10 minutes, they're all from the Office of Ministerial Crockashite. They're kind of from the school where people say justice is supposed to be seen to be done, but in reality isn't actually done. So we need to keep an eye on that. And of course, please, for those of you who are concerned, follow the case of LaShawn Charles, because that family is going through some serious pain right now. Serious pain. Oh, and just one more thing. Please forgive me, I'm a Colombo fan.
After the Grenfell Tower fire, a lot of these buildings with cladding on them were tested to see whether they had a similar material to that which was used at Grenfell Tower. It was established that the cladding that's been used on this building does not meet safety regulations that are now in force. The residents of the building, there are 93 flats inside, were initially told that it was going to cost them each £5,000 to replace the cladding on this building with something that was safer. £5,000 £5,000, they thought, okay, we don't really have that money, but it's not too much. But more recently, in the last week, the property management company has come back and said that it won't be £5,000. It'll actually be potentially £31,300 for each resident, each flat inside this building to replace this cladding.
How is this Office of Product Safety and Standards going to help those residents in Croydon who are now being charged from £5,000 to £31,000 to remove the cladding from their premises? The cladding that they didn't actually put on, didn't authorise, which they now know is a fire risk.
There is no funding from the government, there is no grant from anybody, and we are just 95 disparate people left to our own devices to fund it, which is quite disheartening, to be honest.
The platform of your life changes completely.
It must be incredibly unsettling and worrying.
It is, yes, and then, one has family and they're all phoning and saying, how is it, what's happening? So it spreads right out into a larger disquiet and discomfort.
What is the office going to do about that? You see, these ministers are really good at creating new symbolic offices for this, new symbolic offices for that. But essentially what they're doing is exactly the same thing they accused Labour of when they abolished all their so-called quangos. They're just creating new structures, new identities, so you can kick things into the long grass and people forget exactly what was happening in the first place. But not everyone's falling for it. In Yorkshire, the council is actually being more proactive. What they're saying is that, look, we can't wait for this ineffective government to actually pledge funds to actually secure the safety of our residents. We can't do that. So what they're doing, they're allocating something like £10 million to actually start retrofitting sprinklers of tower blocks that they now know are unsafe. In Leeds, they've set up a special tower blocks task force to look into the work and find out what needs to be done and just get on with it. In Wolverhampton, they've actually allocated £20 million to the job as well. They're just going to get on with it. So while the government is making all these new quangos, these new office for this and office for that, which is really just another code word for ministerial gobshite, essentially what's happening is that people around the country are having to do the work that needs to be done, and they're going to have to campaign afterwards to get the money back from the government, which they pay for, which in the meantime the government is actually going to use to bail out their mates like those in Carillion and so forth. Something's not right. So okay, let's make this more local. I'm not talking about Hackney, I'm talking about Kensington and London. The Grenfell Scrutiny Recovery Board has met again. That happened last week, and there are people now questioning what's the point of this board. It's hardly representative of the community. It's got the infamous Daniel Mould who falls asleep on the job during the meetings continuously. It's met 4 times since October 2017, and it has no decision-making powers. Now, of course, I believe in scrutiny. I mean, the Grenfell MediaWatch itself is a scrutiny body. We scrutinise the media and, by implication, the action of politicians and all their agents. But let's be clear, the Grenfell Recovery Scrutiny Board, they have a responsibility to do something more substantial. They're paid for by the public purse. Now, it's useful that we can get information from them that, for example, I think it's 53 families have now moved into permanent accommodation, but there's still 100 people in temporary accommodation. But we need to see action on things like the feasibility study it promised to take out, which would look into the idea of actually improving the fire safety of the walkways by retrofitting fire sprinklers. Now, that was supposed to have occurred. Has it occurred? What's going on? What about the community asset review? And this is where they were going to go across North Kensington looking for spaces where the community can actually use for organisations, for services that the council were failing to do. This was supposed to report back mid-January. Has it done its job? I don't know. Maybe it has. I just don't know. Does anyone know? What is the point of a scrutiny panel or a scrutiny body which has councillors on the board, but they're not actually giving the information and they're not actually really effectively challenging their local council? Anyway, so I guess those of you who know me know that I'm a glass half full kind of guy, not a glass half empty. The whole point of doing this is really to get a kind of political and spiritual outcome that is reparative in nature. And what I mean is that we're kind of like a public ministry of justice, looking for the families to actually have a decent chance at rebuilding their lives, rebuilding their families, rebuilding their communities. We want those responsible for those who died to go to jail, and that's why we uncover and seek to uncover those stories that the public might not be aware of, but so we can put public pressure. I'm not saying it's always going to work, But we need to be aware of the stories that are being hidden, that are being masked. But also, we want the people up and down the country who are living in unsafe houses, not just those in social housing, but just those where we have governments that are supposed to take responsibility for things like this, where profit must not come before people's lives. So these new offices of public safety or product safety actually do their job. They have the tools to do their jobs because there's political will to do their jobs. But I don't really like to rant, and trust me, I can do that. So I'm going to close, as ever, by saying, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Asher.